right, let's have a seat and get real plain about this, because too much of America's history got dressed up in polite language to hide the rot underneath. Have you ever heard of a breeding plantation? Doesn't that sound almost gentle if you didn't know better? Like we were talking about some idyllic farm, a little patch of heaven where baby calves roam in the pasture. But no, these were hell's own workshops, built to manufacture human beings for profit. After 1808, when the transatlantic slave trade was officially shut down, the good old boys didn't wring their hands about how to keep their workforce going. No, they simply looked at the women they already owned, black women, and decided their wombs would be the new cargo ships. They would breed their stock like cattle. And don't think I'm using that livestock comparison lightly, because the men who ran these places didn't. They advertised fertile women the same way you'd see bulls or mares in a farmer's catalog. They swapped breeding tips like it was some kind of twisted 4-H meeting. They built pens, yes, pens, where young black men and women would be locked together until the woman became pregnant. And then they'd count that unborn child as profit, the same way they counted tobacco leaves or bales of cotton. Thomas Jefferson himself, that man so often dressed in margle and myth, said out loud that a woman who birthed a child every 2 years was more profitable than the best man of the farm. Do you know what kind of heart you have to lack to measure a woman's worth that way? The brutality these women endured is almost unspeakable, but speak it we must. Rape was not the exception, it was the business model. Enslaved women were assaulted by owners, overseers, visiting white men, and even breeding studs among the enslaved, selected and forced into them to guarantee conception. This wasn't some rare crime in the dark. It was a daily sanctioned act. Historians estimate that well over half of enslaved women of childbearing age were assaulted in this way. And every time it happened, the law backed the rapist, because under partis sequitur ventrum, the child took the status of the mother. That meant more property for the enslaver, no matter who the father was. And while the children were profit, they were never meant to be family. Slaveholders knew that breaking the bonds of kinship made people easier to control. So they sold husbands away from wives, mothers from children, children from siblings. Sojourner Truth herself bore 13 children and watched most of them sold away. Imagine the steel it took for her to keep living, speaking, fighting. The auction block was as much a tool of terror as the whip. Now, if an enslaved woman couldn't get pregnant, well, she became a liability. Some were sold off like defective goods. Others were whipped, starved, or simply worked into the ground. And yes, they whipped pregnant women too, making them lie face down in a hole so the unborn child wouldn't be harmed, because the baby was valuable, but the woman's back was still fair game. Those who could conceive often started around age 13. By 20, some had already borne 4 or 5 children. Over a lifetime, 10 or more was not uncommon. The conditions under which they gave birth were as cruel as the system itself. Still working the fields until labor started, delivering in dark, overcrowded quarters, often with no medical care beyond what the community of enslaved women could provide. And when white doctors did step in, it was rarely for compassion. It was to experiment, to control, to take from them even the knowledge of their own bodies. This was not a sideline to slavery, it was the engine. American capitalism fattened itself on these women's wombs just as surely as it did on their bent backs in the fields. Slaveholders could brag about their harvests all they wanted, but they knew the real long-term profit was being born in those quarters. Every child meant more unpaid labor, more wealth passed down, more capital in human form. That's not me talking. That's the plantation ledger books talking. And don't you go thinking this was some faceless evil with no names attached. David Hunt of Mississippi, sitting atop a fortune and more than 500 enslaved souls, most spread across his children's holdings, totaling nearly 1,700. Edward McGehee, running his Bowling Green plantation with close to 1,000 enslaved people. Joseph Emery Davis, brother of Jefferson Davis, with 365 enslaved individuals under his control. These were not obscure men. They were the backbone of the Southern aristocracy, profiting directly from a system that required the bodies of Black women to produce wealth. So when folks today talk about hard work and building America, I can't help but ask, whose work, whose bodies, whose stolen children built that foundation? The breeding plantations were not some side story in American history. They were the dark, beating heart of it. And every time we speak the truth about them, we peel away one more layer of that false, polished narrative. Because the women who survived it deserve more than silence. They deserve the truth spoken plainly. Thank you for taking a little of your time to watch part 1 of the series Black History Uncovered, From Shadows to Spotlight. I do hope that you will subscribe to the channel to make sure you catch every episode of this riveting series, because the truth matters, our history matters, and knowing our true history matters. In this moment in our history, knowledge is power, and the truth is a necessity. For now, this is Sensible Sue signing off. Keep it sensible out there, y'all.